no, let's build the roof first, right? I mean, it's just silly. So I do like that concept of working on dependencies, and I hate the phrase managing dependencies because so many teams try to manage them. I'm really big on language. Let's try to eliminate dependencies.
Exactly. Welcome everybody to another episode of Real Agile or BS. I'm at Agile Peter and I'm with at Agile Bob. We are here to answer your frequently asked questions on Agile and giving you our perspective on whether it's real or if it's not. Today, we want to talk about an idea of multiple teams working on the same backlog. So is it real Agile or BS? Agile Bob, I'll let you take the first crack at it.
Well, I think if you're having multiple teams work on a project, then it makes sense to have them pull from the same product backlog. So I would say...
Ooh, I love these sound effects.
It's got to be real Agile. I think it says in the Scrum guide, more recent versions, that they actually want you to work that way when it's multiple teams working on the same product or project or whatever. Now it gets to be unwieldy when there's a large number of teams. We had an episode about that earlier when we had like 250 people working on a project. That gets to be ridiculous and has a different problem. But if you have people working on the same thing, then you should have them working off of the same backlog. Now, what I don't want is one team that's the database team and one team that's the GUI team. And then we have to integrate all that work together later. Because as I say in my classes, integration is the longest four-letter word in the English language because we're terrible at it. We just stink at it. So we want to optimize away from that. We want to have feature teams that can all pull features from the backlog independently of each other. They don't have to work together as often. So if we can create interdependence between the teams, avoid that integration stuff. A lot of nuance there, but the bottom line is I think it's real Agile.
I would certainly agree. And this is something that comes up in your classes and your clients as well as mine from time to time, this idea of having a single backlog or multiple backlogs when it comes to multiple teams working on the same product or project. And the answer, it is real Agile, certainly, but the answer in a nutshell is yes. If you have multiple teams working on a product or project, they should be pulling from a single source of truth. Sometimes companies like to call this an enterprise backlog. I've seen that before. I don't care what you call it, as long as everyone has a shared understanding that this is what everyone's pulling from. And I always like to give an example because I think it's really important to understand this idea. If you're working with multiple teams, let's say team A, B, and C, and you have a common shared enterprise backlog, when it comes to sprint planning, it allows the teams to see where they're constraining each other or where they're dependent on each other. They can have that visibility, and that ensures that team B is working on something that isn't going ahead of team A or team C where they have delay and they have to wait for them, but since they can all see the product backlog together, they can have those conversations earlier in release planning and sprint planning to talk about, hey, don't do this yet. We need to integrate it later or work together on it later. Let's negotiate on where there is alignment with what the teams are doing. And so I don't want anyone to miss this. A common shared backlog between multiple teams is a powerful way to visualize the work and ensure that there's alignment throughout the life cycle of the project. It's so important. Whenever you're working on with multiple teams and they have separate backlogs, there's a lack of transparency, right? We don't know what they're working on. We don't know if they're working on something that needs to be delayed or needs to be we need to wait on. And so having that, and this is very much an agile principle, this whole idea of transparency definitely helps improve the overall work when you're working with multiple teams. So having one core oracle or one source of truth, your product backlog for multiple teams, is certainly real Agile, and it's a best practice in my opinion. Your thoughts?
I think you're right. I like what you said about dependencies, because I don't like a lot of the analogies we have between creating software and construction, because a lot of them don't hold up for me very well.
Right.
But the construction industry understands things like dependencies, and we don't do that as well in our software world. Imagine if a software team was trying to build a house. Oh wow, let's build the roof first because roofs are easy, right? I mean, that's the way a software team would work. And And in software, you could do that because you could build the rest of the house under that. But why? Why would you
Mhm.
want to do that? Because now you've locked in so much of the house prior to even starting the house, right? Let's build a foundation. Let's ask the people what they want on top of that foundation. Let's figure out how many bedrooms they want. No, let's build the roof first, right? I mean,
Oh,
it's just silly. So I do like that concept of working on dependencies, and I hate the phrase managing dependencies
mm,
because so many teams try to manage them. I'm really big on language. Let's try to eliminate dependencies.
exactly.
Let's figure out how we don't have them so we can work independently of each other without depending on each other as much. So a lot of really good things here. I think the single product backlog, like you said, the single voice of truth, the transparency of it, lets us see all these things right up front and
Mm,
as we're going, and allows us to make better decisions because we know a little bit more of the context of what the whole project is and not just our little tiny piece off on the side. So I agree with you 100%, Peter. It's definitely real agile. Scrum says it's real agile. And I think one of the only ways you can get in trouble with this now that I think about it is you could have teams working from a single product backlog where you just throw everything, including the kitchen sink, into that. Right, let's make it be a single cohesive backlog around a project and not just throw in, everything we can think of because it's a good idea.
absolutely. I completely agree. And one small addition to that, sometimes when I talk about this or answer this question for clients or students, they often will ask, well, what about the sprint backlog? Well, sprint backlogs are great too. Just because you have one source of truth, one single backlog for multiple teams, doesn't mean that it negates or removes sprint backlogs. What we do is we have each team from that product backlog pull the work, and that substantiates their sprint backlog. So that gives them autonomy and focus during the sprint, knowing that this stuff has been talked about during release or sprint planning. You can extract your part of the product backlog to your sprint backlog and focus on it that way. And so during review, you can come back and everyone can work together from the total or one single source of truth product backlog. So sprint backlogs are not negated by a large product backlog worked on by multiple teams, but rather each team creates their own sprint backlog from it. So Real Agile or BS, absolutely. Multiple teams working from a single backlog is Real Agile. It's the best way to go to increase transparency, engagement, and understanding where those friction points are. So thanks so much, guys, for joining us in today's episode of Real Agile or BS. Agile Bob and myself love answering these questions. Make sure if you have any comments or ideas, leave them below. If you'd like to hit us up, you can always go to agileforall.com. Let us know how we can help you. Smash the like button and subscribe. We'll see you guys next time.